Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I have made no attempt to hide the fact that I am a phenomenal nerd. Between the various forms of shooting that I'm involved in, such as Nerf guns, airsoft guns, firearms, and bows and all the other things, I like quite a lot of other things as well, such as science fiction and cosplay. And to combine all three, I have been working on a cosplay of a soldier from the Tanith First and Only Infantry Regiment from the Gaunt's Go series of books, a fictional regiment from the Warhammer 40k universe. And as such, I have a las gun. I also have flamer and heavy bolt gun to go with that, signature weapons of the Tanith First and Only. And I found a cat badge on Thingiverse, and I'll put a link to that in the description because that's really cool. And today I want to look at another piece of that cosplay, another signature part and very distinctive part of cosplaying the Tanith First and Only Infantry Regiment, and that is the Tanith War Knife. Now, I've spent quite a long time trying to find exactly the right type of blade and handle and all the rest of it, and I've never really been happy. That said, what I've actually done is taken the grip, which you can't see in this lighting, from an AKM Type 1 bayonet that was put on Thingiverse a few years back, and I've modified it to make a new blade. And if you can hear that sound in the background, that's my 3D printer coming to an end on the actual blade part of it. Now, given that it's going to be used for cosplay, it does need to have a foam blade, so I'm going to be making that as well. If I was a proper YouTuber, I would have bothered with an introduction at some point, but I'm not, so I don't. But to pass on to the top-down view to have a closer look at all these bits.
So, I hear you say, why were you 3D printing if you already have the handle and you want the blade to be foam to be safe for gaming? Well, I couldn't help myself but model a very accurate blade for 3D printing, or at least visually accurate. It's not actually a true blade. Also, I have printed a second 3D printed core to put foam on. And then I went ahead and printed 2 lots of everything else. So I'm going to end up with 2 Tanith War Knives. The grip scales here, they'll get painted in kind of a wood effect. These pieces are the same as well. That's just kind of the bayonet mounting lug. So it's really these parts that are the difference. So on the original design, this rear part of the tang goes into the grip, and you piece the grip scales around it, one on each side, and it leaves this shape in the middle for the blade to go. So I'm keeping that design for the blade that I've made, but on this version, instead of having a separate piece there, I've filled it in all the way up to here. So this will have the bayonet mount and the grip scales go onto this, and then I will glue foam onto the outside here, probably one piece on each side, and then cut that to the shape, and it will be similar to this. It might end up being a bit thicker. It depends what kind of foam I end up getting. I think the easiest thing to do is just finish up with this. I need to clean up this top edge. I need to get rid of that because that's kind of sharp, and there's a little bit of just a step there that could be smoothed out. But I'll clean that up, and I'll actually get this first one painted. Bayonet mount goes up first, and then this will get glued like that, and then I'll put this aside until I've got foam ready. So there is the cosplay version basically done. I just need to fill up the on a real knife, these would be metal pins that were pinned in place to hold the grip scales on, but obviously with a 3D printed plastic one, I've glued it in place, and that will be perfectly sufficient. 3D printed blade. This is not something used for kind of Nerf or airsoft or anything like that. This is just for show, just for cosplay. But that came out fairly well. But I can put that aside because we need to look at this one now. And I've got the grip scales painted up and looking good, but we need to concentrate on the blade. Now, to make it soft, what I've got, so this is 3mm EVA foam, and my plan at the moment is to make 3 layers. I was originally going to plan for 2 layers, but the 3mm that I got is actually thinner than I expected it to be, because I didn't check my measurements first, not because I don't know what 3mm look like. So I'm going to make 3 layers. The middle layer is going to be cut out for the core, and then the outer 2 layers are going to cover up all of the holes and everything. But as I have this blade, I may as well use it to make myself an outline. And you'll notice for the first time ever I've got my cutting mat out, because I'm going to be doing a lot of kind of directly downwards cutting, which... So this EVA foam was actually supplied in a like rolled up and then taped together. So each piece is looking like it's going to come out slightly curved. Now there are ways to straighten out EVA foam, a lot of them with tools that I don't have. So what I will do instead is make the kind of the outer 2 blade pieces. I'll have one each curling each way, so that I'll put them on the outside so that they curl inwards, so that when I glue it together and cut it, I'll be cutting away at this kind of curved in surface anyway to shape the blade. So hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. So we see that the core doesn't actually go quite to the tip of the blade, so we've got just a little bit of completely foam at the front, so that should make it nice and safe. So let's draw on the central core itself. That's the piece I'm keeping, particularly at the back there. That's even smaller. So the central piece goes on like that. Actually, there's a little bit of space at the top, so more like that. And then each of the side pieces gets glued on like that. So they see there's the kind of hollow core for it all to fit into. Now there are various glues that are recommended for use with EVA foam. I have none of those. So I'm going to run through, I'm just going to use the scrap pieces. I'm going to run through the glues I do have and see what sticks best. So after going through basically every type of glue I have and having all of no luck whatsoever, I had a chat with a good friend of mine by the name of Carl, and in between saying some very nice things about me, he pointed me towards this stuff, which is the EVO-STIK multi-purpose impact instant contact adhesive, which is a terribly boring and instructive title. But this glue is exceptionally good for use with EVA foam. Immediately, as soon as I've used that glue, and lots of black and dark colours, it's not really showing up on the camera, and it's of course winter, so it's the middle of the night all day long. So yeah, no lighting will ever be good enough. Anyway, so this is actually a new set of foam, because in gluing together the various practice pieces, I've ruined all of the foam that I filmed earlier in this video. But I have managed to stick together now with the new glue that Carl pointed me in the direction of, 3 pieces of, I think it's 3mm EVA foam that I'm using. So this makes this just about 9mm in total. And it's got the 3D printed core up to about there, and then it's nice and soft at the end. And this seems like yeah, I reckon that's going to be safe enough for general Nerf use, although, you know, politics aside, there's very few Nerf events over this side of the pond that actually permit you the use of foam weapons. And then after that I move on to the next step, which is to shape this up, because it's a little bit of a mess. The knife I was using wasn't amazingly sharp. I did actually sharpen it halfway through and got some much better cuts after I did that. But one of the advantages of the EVA foam is that it can be sanded and shaped with a Dremel tool or craft drill of any type. So I'm going to go over this and flatten up the back, give the front a couple of chamfers to make it look like a sharpened blade, very much like the original 3D printed version.
Not a perfect match. The foam blade will be slightly larger. Would you like a time lapse of this, or do you want me to just skip ahead? I know a few people have mentioned that I do overdo the time lapses, so I think I might skip this one. Actually, no, post in the comments. Let me know if you want a time lapse or not, and we'll see who wins that vote.
So after a little bit of dremeling work, this has actually come out rather well, I think. Dremel versus the EVA foam is a lot more successful than I had thought, given how soft a material it is and how violent a Dremel is in mechanical terms. Although it has caught and torn in some places, but I'll get back to that. First bit I did was to smooth off the back surface to create that straight line. Now I ended up still with this curve here. On the file for the 3D printed version, the back of the blade is flat all the way to the point. But because it was printed with this surface on the print bed, but this peeled just a little bit here, and so we've ended up with this slight curve at the back, which actually kind of looks cool in its own little way. But when I traced that out onto the foam, I forgot about that and ended up doing the same thing there. However, it does mean they're going to match. Although, like I've said a couple of times, the foam blade is quite a bit bigger than the plastic blade. I've also done my level best to create an fake edge along the front surface, which isn't necessarily as smooth as I'd like it to be, but for a first go with this tool and doing it by hand, it's come out relatively well. I'm actually kind of pleased with it. What I would likely do is, if I was going to make more of these, is I'd actually make some sort of jig. I'd 3D print a shape to go on the front of the Dremel so that it locked onto the back here, and you'd kind of run it along, and it would make a very, very nice even edge to give you that kind of very neat look. Whereas this is going to look a little bit messy, but like I said, it's my first one, and I'm happy with that. Also of note is I can actually feel some lumps. Like I can feel a lump there, I can feel a lump just here, and I'm pretty sure that's from because it's where the core is. So where I've ended up with lumps of glue in various places, I didn't clean them off properly. I thought I'd cleaned off most of it, but I think that's what that is. I missed a couple of spots. But you can't really tell from looking at it, given how uneven the rest of it is from my lack of experience here. I have noticed that the tip of the blade takes a set. If it bends, it will stay bent. But you can also, by the same merits, straighten it up and it will be straight again. Right, so let's see if I can get this into focus, and I think that's just about focused. So along the front here, in between the layers, it might not have been glued properly, I think. So when I went over it with the Dremel, it tore the outer layer away from the other two. And I ended up with this horrible messy gouge all the way up in here. Now, I had two options. Either I'd cut the whole thing shorter and avoid that area, or what I actually did do was try to fill it. So I put some of the glue into where the layers had separated, and then I took, I had some little scraps of EVA, and I pressed it down into there. There was also a little nick in the middle layer at the back here, and I did the same thing. A little bit of glue on, shoved in some of the EVA foam scraps that I had, mostly from cutting the corner here, pressed on in place, and then once the glue had set, I went over it gently with the Dremel, and it's mostly like, I'm not sure if this is coming through on camera, but by eye, I can see that there is a separate piece just in this area here. And at the back, I can see a little kind of dot there where where that separate piece was put in. I would like to say that they'd disappear in the coats of paint, but that might actually bring them out. Well, we will have to see. Learning my lesson from not having the right glue, I'm going to go straight to the recommended coating for the foam. I have heat sealed it, sort of. You're supposed to use a heat gun to go over the surface to seal the surface somehow. but unfortunately I don't have a heat gun. I do have a hairdryer though, so I've kind of faked it with the hairdryer.
So there we have the plaster dip done, and I'm not convinced I've done it quite right. It's entirely possible that my heat sealing with a hairdryer wasn't really hot enough. Really need to get myself a proper heat gun if I'm going to be doing any more EVA stuff. But the plaster dip has taken, and it's got a sort of a rough finish. And this is the first time I've done anything like this, so I'm not really sure what I should be looking for or what that finish means. However, it's gone on fairly well. There are no gaps in the finish. There are no gaps in the coating, rather. So I think that's good enough to move on to painting and just sticking on the grip scales. Alright, so there we go. That is a 3D printed and foam version of the Tanith war knife, which of course doesn't actually fit as a bayonet to my last gun because that's an AK mounting point. I have an airsoft AK and it doesn't fit to that either because while it has the loop, the clip at the back wasn't modelled, so it doesn't fit as a bayonet. However, I don't care about such things. I care that I now have 2 Tanith war knives. Now these are of course the second and third blades I've made for cosplay. The first being Rukia's katana from the Bleach series, which I made for my sister's cosplay when she cosplayed Rukia a little while back. Now this blade is balsa wood, so very, very soft, easy to sand and cut. In fact, I made most of the profile of the blade with just with sandpaper going down it. Not that it survived the test of time very well, it's kind of beaten up because balsa wood is pretty light. But there's that. And the 3D printed Tanith war knife, as you've seen, with the lightning cuts in it, which is something I didn't actually replicate with the... I get to why that's difficult later. I didn't replicate the cuts into the side of the blade on the foam version, even though now I think it's pretty easy to do, because this foam was much easier to shape with the Dremel than I had expected. It's like you don't expect to be able to take a Dremel to foam and have it not shred to bits. But EVA foam is much tougher than that, has different characteristics than other things I'm used to. So it can be shaped very nicely with the Dremel and other methods as well. So I probably would, if I was to make another one, I probably would put the lightning cut or blood channel, whichever you want to call it. I would also change the way that the grip is assembled, because these pins here are actually separate 3D printed pieces that glue in, and the grip piece I'll see if I get a close-up of these on both blades actually. The grip scales peeled because 3D printing often peels, and they don't actually fit to the tang very well. As long as you don't look too closely, they're just fine. I can't really see it there, just about there. Just at the end of the foam core, that's where the foam tends to... Oh yeah, there you go, there you can see it. The foam tends to bend right there, which leaves a little crease. However, the little trick from Kamui Cosplay is to use the heat gun, or in my case hairdryer, to go over it and warm it up, and it will recover some of that. And the hairdryer does a fairly good job of that. One thing I wasn't expecting was the weight balance, and it's something I probably should have been expecting because I know a little bit about swords and knives, not nearly as much as I do about gun-shaped shooting. But the 3D printed version, when it came out, the balance point is right at the top of the grip, just there. And that means that when you're holding it, the balance point is above your hand, which is where you want it with any kind of blade combat. Not that I'd be using this to actually hurt someone, because it's a 3D printed knife. It's not really going to do any damage in an actual fight, and I don't really get into actual fights anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. But it does make it feel very light and nimble, and yes, it's a light blade anyway because it's plastic, but it feels light and nimble because the balance point is so close to the middle. On the foam blade, however, because the foam is so much lighter than the 3D printed blade, but it's still got all of the 3D printed plastic at the back, the balance point ends up being all of the way back here, well into the grip. So when you're holding it, that's kind of at the middle finger where the central gravity is now at your middle finger here, because all of this is foam and it has much less density. And that is both an odd thing, but also actually a good thing because it's a foam blade. Now it's odd because it means like swinging it around and doing all of this swashbuckling kind of stuff is very difficult because the whole thing doesn't move like a metal or even the plastic bladed knife would move. So it's very difficult to do all of the flourishes and fancy things that you'd want to do with a foam blade. However, when it comes to actually striking someone in the context of a Nerf game where you really don't want to hurt someone, you just want to tap them and that's it, having the balance point behind the joint of your wrist means that instead of adding, like with a heavier blade, the mass at the top adds to your momentum as you make the strike. Because the center of gravity is below that point, this actually takes away some of the momentum and you've got all of this weight slowing the blade down, which means when you go to strike someone, it's got much less of an impact. So not only has it got the weight balance taking away impact, it's also got the foam taking away impact, which means that this is a perfectly safe thing to actually use. Now, any of my games that I run, we have a tap rule, so you can't swing and hack at someone with a foam sword. You just tap them on the shoulder usually, and that's it. We don't use any of the LARPing rules or kind of HEMA stances to really have some interesting swordplay, because it's more about the shooting than the hacking and stabbing. So any foam blade in that context is just a tap on the shoulder or on the arm or something like that, and that counts as a hit. And it matches what I wanted, which is, of course, a Tanith war knife. A 30cm straight blade with a single edge, and, I mean, lightning cuts on this one, not on this one, oh well. There is, however, one thing missing. So yes, I have nowhere to put it if I was to carry this thing. And what that means is that the next project is to make a scabbard or sheath for these. Maybe one each, maybe one that fits both, I'm not sure. I'll decide that later. But that will be a video coming probably fairly soon, I expect. So special thanks to Carl for pointing me in the direction of a glue that was both available in the UK and also appropriate for sticking the EVA foam together. I also want to send some thanks to Svetlana and Benny of Kamui Cosplay, whose videos on YouTube really helped me and gave me the guidance to make this blade, and will almost certainly make me make more in the future, because this will not be the last. But link to their channel will be in the description as well. And thank you to everyone else for watching. I'm ED-SKaR, and I always will be.
Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and if I was a proper YouTuber, then sometimes I'd wear a beret.